Hello, this is Unseen Poetry, and it's the second question, the comparison question, focusing on the exam paper from June 2017. The first poem was Autumn by Alan Bold, and the second poem is Today by Billy Collins. What do you need to do with 27.2? First thing, you need to remember it's only worth 8 marks, and as such, you should be spending 10 minutes, maximum 15 minutes writing about it. It doesn't pay, you don't get more marks for spending more time on it. What's my best advice for this one? You are playing a rather elaborate game of spot the difference. It's like that sort of thing you find in a kid's magazine. Spot the difference, play the game. And what are you spotting the difference between? You are spotting the difference between the methods in this poem, Autumn, and the methods in this poem. And how do we know that? Because the question says it. In both Today and Autumn, the speakers describe attitudes towards the seasons. What are the similarities and or differences between the ways the poets present these attitudes? So this question is asking you to play spot the difference in terms of methods. And methods are the only thing that you get awarded marks for. So of course, you do need to articulate the differences in attitudes between the two poems, but it's the methods that matter most. And therefore, the eye test perhaps works about as good as anything else. But before we do that, let's read this particular poem. Today, if ever there were a spring day so perfect, so uplifted by a warm intermittent breeze that it made you want to throw open all the windows in the house and unlatch the door to the canary's cage, indeed rip the little door from its jamb, a day when the cool brick paths and the garden bursting with peonies seemed so etched in sunlight that you felt like taking a hammer to the glass paperweight on the living room end table, releasing the inhabitants from their snow-covered cottage so they could walk out holding hands and squinting into this larger dome of blue and white. Well, today is just that kind of day. The eye test, firstly. If we're playing spot the difference. One stanza. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sort of couplets. They're not even, well, they are, you can call them stanzas if you really want, but they are couplets. So there's the eye test. What do you notice just by looking at the poems? And typically there are some obvious similarities and or differences. So if both poems were single stanzas like this one, then that's what you'd say. In this instance, they're not. Now, if you only play spot the difference, you can only pick up around half the marks. What you then have to do is consider why. That is the strangest W I've ever written in my life. Why? Why did I write that strange W? Why? So why has this poem gone for one stanza? And why has this poem gone for many couplets? Hopefully what you then do is begin to interrogate it a little bit more. So as I was reading this one, hopefully you could hear me sort of struggle to breathe. It wasn't so bad I was really running out of breath, but this was because there isn't a single sort of full stop or end stop until there. And so as a consequence, what we have is one continuous, even though it's broken, even though we have the movement from one couplet to another couplet, it is in fact all part of the same thing. Why? Why do you think it's done that? Why do you think there isn't any sort of moment of real pause until the last line? As we look here, we must think, well, why? Why do we think the writer's only used one stanza? Why do we think the writer has used this metaphor for green stuff and money. Why do we think the writer has chosen this particular method about the sky glowing red with a quiet rage? It's another metaphor. Why? I've said that probably too many times already, but that's the most important thing that you're doing with this question. What methods, what ways have the writers compared, sorry, let's start that again. What ways have the writers used to articulate, to describe their attitudes towards the seasons? So in terms of a structure for your question, it should go a bit like this. You start with, what are the attitudes for both poems? So autumn shows that the season of autumn is a cunning thief who has stolen the beauty of the natural world from right beneath people's eyes. We can see how it alters the way that humans live. By contrast, in today, we can see how there is an incredibly optimistic tone to the poem, because it's spring, ultimately. New life, rebirth, new beginnings, there's optimism in the air. So those are the different attitudes. And then it's methods. And that's what you spend most of your time on. One sentence comparing the attitudes is all you need. Two, if you really are struggling to put it into just one sentence, but it shouldn't be any longer than that. And then it's methods. And in this instance, I would be picking one stanza in autumn versus 9 couplets in today. I would be picking one end stop in today as opposed to, well, you can say many full stops, but many pauses. And then why? So why do we have one end stop? Because the enjambment helps to create this feeling of movement, this feeling of hope, this feeling of optimism, this sense of rebirth. The continuous flow of the language is mirroring the way in which the speaker is almost unable to control their excitement with all of these words flowing out. Whereas in the poem Autumn, we can see the pauses, the hesitations, the sense of being tricked, and how the writer is using punctuation and is using language repetitively to kind of misdirect us, to make us look in another direction. Now, those are the things that I have identified. They do not have to be what you would identify. And that's the beauty of this question. There are always a few options. So if, for instance, you wanted to talk about the use of metaphor in this poem, Autumn, which is similar to the use of metaphor in this poem, then that would be fine too. Similarities and or differences to the ways. Doesn't really matter what methods you choose. The key thing is that word, hopefully I can write slightly better W this time, is why. Why do you think the writer has done it? That's the way to get into the top band of marks. That's it for this video. See you next time.